I'm not Dr. Sam. I actually got a text this morning just a little bit before the first service that he wasn't feeling well, and he was going to try to get through the first service, and asked if I might have a backup sermon that I could bring this morning to take over for him. This is Palm Sunday. I looked through my 3 Palm Sunday backup services, but I said that wouldn't be fair to those who had caught part of the service this morning and wanted to catch the rest at 11. So I asked, and he sent me a copy of his sermon. So the sermon I present this morning is Dr. Sam's sermon for today. The crowds cheer, then jeer Jesus. Some time ago, there was a stage play called Construction. It was the story of some people who wanted to build a wall, but a young man in the play urged them instead to build a bridge. The people turned on him and killed him because of what he wanted them to do. After they killed him, one of the characters said, "We can't go on crucifying the truth forever." When Jesus went to Jerusalem, he found a wall. He had come to build a bridge, but he knew all along that his crucifixion awaited him on the other side of the wall. What's wrong with Jesus? Kings always build walls to protect their people and to keep their enemies out. That's what we want them to do. One of the spots you visit when you go to the Holy Land is the Mount of Olives. From there you can see the walls surrounding the city of Jerusalem. Kings built the walls around cities to protect them from attack. And Dr. Sam tells a story of a time when he studied in Israel in the early 1980s, and his mother and sister visited him. He took them to the Mount of Olives. Back then, as today, there was a guy with a camel. Dr. Sam's sister wanted to have her photo taken sitting on the camel. The man told him it would cost $2 for his sister to have her photo taken on his camel. Dr. Sam agreed $2 was reasonable. The only problem was that his sister was, as he describes it, very short and wide. The camel was kneeling, but still was as tall as she was. It took everything the camel guy and Dr. Sam could do to push his sister up on the camel. Then he made the camel stand up. Dr. Sam took some photos of her sitting high on the camel. She was thrilled. Then she indicated that she was ready to get down. The camel driver turned to Dr. Sam and said, $10. Dr. Sam refused. The vendor made some sign language indicating there was such an effort to get her up there and that the camel was working harder than normal just standing there. So he wanted $10. Again, Dr. Sam refused. By this time, his sister, who was quite dramatic, was freaking out. She shouted, "Pay the $10, Sam! Get me down from here!" He would not. The man insisted on getting $10. Dr. Sam said, "You can keep her." Then he walked away. What are brothers for? His sister's protest grew louder at the thought of being the bride of an Arab camel master. As he walked farther away, she yelled for him to pay the man whatever he wanted. The camel just groaned. Finally, the man called to him and said, Okay, $2. Dr. Sam walked back and paid him the $2, and he made the camel kneel. His sister got off, much to her relief and the relief of her desert steed. On Palm Sunday, Jesus' disciples took the donkey from Bethphage near the Mount of Olives. There's a pretty church there today with beautiful printed murals showing how Jesus rode down the Mount of Olives, across the Kidron Valley, and then up the hill towards the city's gate. What a striking sight it must have been. Jesus knew, as everyone else knew, what it meant for him to enter Jerusalem like this. The old kings had always entered the cities to begin their rule this way, riding on a donkey. It was a lowly animal signifying peace. The people lined the road, waving palm branches and calling out, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest!" Jesus was aware of what he was doing. He knew what it meant. He knew that those people in Jerusalem would think when they saw him coming into the city in this way, "Here is our new king, the Messiah. He will drive out the Romans. He will sit on David's throne. We will be free." Was Jesus a king? When Alexander the Great was the greatest king of the then known world, he decided to conquer all of Asia Minor. Darius, the king of Persia, the only other ruler who could possibly claim superpower status, sued for peace. He said to Alexander, "Let's you and I divide up Asia. You can rule over one part, I can rule over the other." Alexander replied, "Just as the earth can stand only one sun, so the world can stand only one ruler." Alexander promptly crushed Darius. That's what kings do. They attack. They conquer. Was Jesus a king? He claimed to be the Jewish Messiah. The Hebrew word Mashiach means the anointed one. In the Hebrew Bible, prophets anointed kings before they took the throne. When prophets anointed someone to be king, there was always a king on the throne. The prophet's action of anointing often led to rebellion. The Jewish people had hoped for centuries for a new anointed one, a savior, a Messiah, to rule, drive out the oppressors, and establish Israel as a nation again. Jesus had disappointed their hopes. He was not the king they had hoped for. They dragged him before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high council, like our Supreme Court. The high priest Caiaphas presided. After refusing to respond to charges, the high priest asked him, "Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." How did Jesus answer? He said, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming into the clouds of heaven." The high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we need any more witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?" They answered, "He deserves to die." Jesus deserved to die for claiming that he was the king and they would see him at the right hand of God, making himself equal to God. Blasphemy to them. They dragged Jesus before Pontius Pilate, the governor. They did not accuse him of claiming to be God's son, though. Pilate would not have cared about that. That was a religious issue. Rather, they leveled the other charge, that Jesus claimed to be the Messiah, the new King of Israel. Pilate asked him, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Jesus responded, "You say so." It was an ambiguous way of saying, "Yes, I am, but maybe not in the way you think." Pilate did not think that Jesus was guilty of rebelling against Rome. It was obvious to this Roman governor that Jesus was no warrior. He had not put up a fight when he was arrested, and his followers scattered. Pilate offered to release Jesus, but the crowds preferred Barabbas over Jesus. After he released Barabbas, Pilate turned Jesus over to his soldiers to be crucified. Soldiers took Jesus to the Praetorium, the governor's headquarters. The stone pavement is still there where the mocking soldiers hailed Jesus as a king. They clothed him in scarlet, pushed a crown of thorns on his head, and gave him a stick for a scepter. They bowed before him in mock humility. They made fun of Jesus. Then they beat him with a stick, whipped him, and nailed him to the cross. They lifted the cross high for him to hang there until he died. Was Jesus crazy to talk about being a king and having a kingdom? Maybe it was foolhardy to ride into Jerusalem acting like King David. It was sedition, rebellion, and treason. Wasn't that a crazy thing to do? He entered the city of Jerusalem on what we call Palm Sunday. The crowd shouted, "Hosanna!" Hosanna is literally a plea for help. Save us, please. It was a prayer, a request for Jesus to save them from Rome. Hosanna is the same root in Hebrew as Joshua, which of course Jesus' name is derived from. It means to save. That's what you would expect a king to do, to save his people. God raised up both Saul and David to be the first kings of Israel, to deliver the people from Philistine oppression. Sunday school teacher was teaching her children about the ancient kings of Israel. She said to them, "We've been learning about how powerful kings and queens were in Bible times. But there is a higher power than kings and queens. Can anybody tell me what it is?" One child blurted out, "Aces?" That was Dr. Sam's. On the first Palm Sunday, the people hoped that Jesus would be their ace, their Messiah, their deliverer. They were crying out for him to save them from the soldiers who occupied the land. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, because he will save us. Save us, please. They were not shouting Hosanna like long live the king. They were raising a petition, save us, King Jesus. Drive out Pontius Pilate and all these Roman soldiers. Defeat Caesar's armies. Set us free to be a nation again. Before Jesus was born, the Lord told Joseph in a dream, "Name him Jesus," or Joshua, "because he will save his people from their sins." The salvation Jesus brings us has to do with our sins. But perhaps this is not the kind of salvation we want. I mean, I like my sins, don't you? I have my favorites. Don't you? What would we want from our King? Well, we want to be healthy and wealthy. We want to be comfortable and to prosper. But did Jesus come to give us that kind of salvation? Some do preach a prosperity gospel that if you follow Jesus, you will have everything you ever wanted. But Jesus is not that kind of king. No. He died for us on the cross. He invites us to pick up our cross and to follow him. What kind of king is that? Jesus is not the kind of king most people follow. Jesus does not lead troops to conquer opposing armies, but teaches young disciples about the peace he gives. He does not hold up the severed heads of vanquished kings, but gently lifts the faces of the battered and the bruised. Jesus does not glide astride a white war horse, but bounces along upon a humble donkey. Jesus does not prance around with a crown of gold inlaid with jewels, but bows, afflicted by a crown of thorns. He does not wield a golden scepter, but carries a splintered crossbeam. Jesus is not a king who welcomes the wealthy into his throne room, but a crucified criminal who promised paradise to the thief dying beside him. Jesus pays most attention not to generals, governors, or military advisors, but to the marginalized, the down and out, the blind, the crippled, the hated tax collector, and the prostitute. He does not seek to establish an exclusive club, but seeks to include the homeless, the helpless, and the hopeless. Jesus is not the kind of king that the people shouting Hosanna wanted. No. So by Friday, they are shouting for him to be crucified. Is Jesus the kind of king that we want? Are we part of the crowds that shout, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord" on Sunday, but shout, "Crucify him" on Friday? Do we follow such a king any better than they did? Do we want a king who ends up on the cross and invites his disciples to follow his examples? Will we look good on wood? Do we want a king to follow who forgives his enemies and works for their good? Do we want a king who works for peace, who tells Peter to put away his sword? Do we want a monarch who does not rule over people, but instead serves them? Do we want a king who turns the other cheek when others insult him? Do we want a leader who tells his generals to take the role of slaves and to wash the feet of soldiers? Where is the authority in that? How will they respect you after you do that? As he hung on that cross in pain, he looked down on the chief priest who had accused him and had dragged him to Pilate. He saw the soldiers who had mocked him for claiming to be a king, the ones who had taunted and tortured him. And Jesus prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." What kind of a king is he? He's the kind of king who leaves his throne in heaven to die between two criminals. He's the kind of king who forgives his enemies. He's the kind of king who promises to all of us who will turn to him no matter what we may have done in our past. "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." What kind of a king is Jesus? He is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He loves us more than our parents. He forgives us even as we sin against him and drive nails into his hands. And he has made it possible for us to live with him forever in his kingdom of love. We will own him as our king and follow him on this journey to our cross. Will we? Let us pray. God, you know our weaknesses, our doubts, and our fears. We confess we sometimes do not want to be delivered from our sins. We don't want to sacrifice or to suffer like you. We would rather not pick up our cross. We would rather not stand up for justice or work for peace. Help us to own you as our King, to follow you as you lead us into the future. May we accept your forgiveness and in turn forgive one another. May we look upon the role of servant as you put that towel around you and wash the disciples' feet. May we be worthy to be called your followers, to be called Christians.